The Montana Festival of the Book. I'm so pleased to see you all here. This is our 8th annual festival, and it's only possible because audiences keep coming out and supporting our writers and reading and literature. So thank you all very, very much for being here. The Festival of the Book is put on by Humanities Montana, and we are the state's affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities. So the festival is made possible by the National Endowment for the Humanities, the National Endowment for the Arts, the Paul G. Allen Foundation, and many local businesses. It's my pleasure to introduce Prageeta Sharma, your moderator today. Prageeta is the director of the University of Montana's renowned creative writing program. She recently succeeded Kate Gadbo, who I believe is in the audience. She comes to UM from visiting appointments at the New School University in New York and a professorship in Goddard College's low residency MFA program. She received her MFA from Brown and an MA in Media Studies from the New School for Social Research. Prageeta is the author of 2 books of poems, The Opening Question, which was the winner of the 2004 Fence Modern Poets Book Prize, and Bliss to Fill. Her 3rd volume, Infamous Landscapes, is due out in a few months. So, without further ado, Prageeta Sharma.
Should I move? Thank you, Kim. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I'm just having a great time. I just moved here in July, and encountering these 4 great authors with amazing books has just been a pleasure. So I'm really grateful that Kim invited me to moderate this panel, and this is a panel on new fiction. What I'm going to start with is just an introduction of our 4 authors, and then I'll have some prepared questions for them. And from that, we'll grow this and open it up to the audience. You can hear me. I also want to remind you to turn your cell phones off if you haven't already. Okay, first we have Aryn Kyle. Aryn Kyle is a graduate of the University of Montana Writing Program. In 2004, her short story, Foaling Season, now the first chapter of her debut novel, The God of Animals, appeared in the Atlantic Monthly and won her a National Magazine Award for Fiction. The God of Animals was published by Scribner in March of 2007. Her short fiction has appeared or is forthcoming in the Atlantic Monthly, the Georgia Review, Plowshares, Story Quarterly, Best New American Voices 2005, Best American Short Stories 2007, and elsewhere. Aryn spent most of her childhood in Grand Junction, Colorado, and now lives in Missoula. Larry Watson was born and raised in North Dakota. He received his BA and MA from the University of North Dakota and his PhD from the Creative Writing Program at the University of Utah. He taught writing and literature at the University of Wisconsin, Stevens Point for 25 years, and presently he's a visiting professor of English at Marquette University in Milwaukee. He's the author of the novels In a Dark Time, Montana, 1948, White Crosses, Laura, and Orchard, the fiction collection Justice, and the chapbook of poetry Leaving Dakota. His novel Sundown Yellow Moon is just out from Random House. Dee McNamer grew up in north central Montana, the oldest of 5 children. Her grandparents on both sides homesteaded in Montana. After graduating from Cutbank High School, she attended the U of Washington and University of Montana, graduating from Montana with a BA in journalism. For a decade, she worked as a daily journalist, then turned to fiction. She received an MFA in creative writing from UM and now teaches in the university's creative writing program. She is the author of 4 novels, Rima and the Weeds, One Sweet Quarrel, My Russian, and Red Rover, just out from Viking. She and we have a great review of it in the Times tomorrow. She and her husband, Brian DeSalvatore, live in Missoula. Neil McMahon was born in Chicago in 1949 and moved to Helena, Montana in 1971. He signed on as an apprentice with the Carpenters Union there soon afterward and continued working construction for the next 30 years. In the mid-'70s, he started writing fiction and has published 5 novels with HarperCollins. The most recent of them, Lone Creek, takes place in and around Helena. I'll start with a little introduction. I've really just enjoyed reading these books over the last month, and for me, it's been a great introduction to a really rich landscape and really talented writers, some of which I was familiar with before and some I've encountered over this last month. All 4 of these books revolve, begin, or entangled with a death and murder, an event to reckon with. No doubt this is inherent in fictional narratives, but what I find fascinating is how all of your characters, or central characters, negotiate and explore the events that unfold. While I know Dee and Larry explored these ideas in the investigative journalism panel, I'd like to begin this discussion more on the structure and the style of your novels. And ultimately, it seems all 4 of the novels have beautiful language, dynamic characters with intriguing perspectives. Each one was moving, compelling, and allowed me to experience careful and succinct storytelling. I wonder if we can move around this panel and discuss process and the development of your respective structures and scope. And I'll start this panel with a single question for each of you, and then we'll grow this discussion together. And I encourage you to have questions for each other, and we can, at the end, take questions from the audience. And I'll start with Neil. I'm so formal. I'm just so excited.
That won't last long.
And yeah, you can relax, unlike I am.
I can bring the tone of this thing down.
Neil, tell me about the structure of this novel and its relationship to noir. We can see how you've utilized Chandler, or more specifically, how you have Hugh Daverin, your main character, functioning similarly to a Marlowe character. Quote, I got this quote from Searching for a Kind of Hidden Truth, a Secret. I'm reminded of a quote Ross MacDonald says of Chandler, quote, Chandler wrote like a slumming angel and invested the sun-blinded streets of Los Angeles with a romantic presence. Here we have you exploring the sun-blinding mountains of Montana, and your character, Hugh Daverin, the kind of I saw as a slumming angel, caught in a web, not unlike the adventures of Marlowe. Could you tell me a little bit more about how you came to write Lone Creek?
Well, I have to preface this by saying that I'm working on a sequel to it right now, and in fact, I just, stole a line from Chandler that's a little less eloquent, but maybe his most famous, which is, it stood out like a tarantula on a slice of angel food cake. I unabashedly try to write thrillers. I don't consider them to be so much crime novels in the same sense as Elmore Leonard or many of the other big names. And to a large extent, the thriller plot is a prop, a vehicle to try to get at other issues or facets of the story, of the landscape, and most particularly of the characters. And in this book, and in fact, I think in pretty much all of them, I've started out with a pretty flimsy premise in terms of the plot, and only in the course of quite a bit of desperation, realizing how flimsy it is, have I been able to sort of prop up, some more foundation underneath it, and so on and so forth. So I'll leave it at that. I don't know if that's a very good answer.
I'm intrigued by flimsy. I have to beg to differ, but it is interesting to think about, what pushes your work, or is the impetus, or even casting it away to then write more. What we'll do is I'll move through these questions, and then I think what we'll do is we'll be able to find connections between the works. And so I'll then move to Deirdre. Dee, I don't know how much I'm revealing about the book, so I do apologize if I'm referring to something you have not yet encountered in the book, but I think I hope I make it enticing. And I hope the authors are fine with whatever I reveal. D, we start with a kind of inferred murder or event confused by our eccentric undertaker, which signals us to the development of delightful eccentric viewpoints of your characters. Additionally, it's mesmerizing. Oh, you'll also see that I have 20 questions for each author, so you can really answer one or two that you feel comfortable, and we can return to some of the others. Additionally, it's mesmerizing to see how you sustain a lyrical quality in your language while still revealing relevant details. And as a poet, I'm always sort of intrigued by this because poets sometimes we forget to make our details push equally for an outer and inner life. Tell me more about how you develop these characters. How did you come to pace the characters so that more of their behaviors, choices, and secrets are explained and examined through, at times, a sustained lyrical language? Maybe it's really about talking about the process of the language in the book.
Well, I think in terms of structure, one, and this goes to the language, there's that visual effect that you're all familiar with, I think, where you can either see two human profiles or you can see a flower vase. And I will go back and forth, and it's fun to do. And I think that what I was trying to do in this book was to do everything around the shape of it such that the story or the key elements at the middle only showed themselves once everything on the outside had been filled in. And that is a dicey and extremely inefficient way to proceed. It's much more efficient to just draw the vase, but I didn't want to. So if you're going to do that, then you're dealing with a lot of tangential material for a long time and characters that might not seem to obviously play into a central story for a long time. So in order to keep the reader going and invested, I think I knew on some level early on that every single sentence virtually was going to have to be, if not enticing, a good sentence. I had to offer the payoff of language and scene and image in a way that made it interesting and involving enough that they would stay with me through this goofy arrangement. And so that's why in my case, some of the characters, I didn't really know, a couple of them, one in particular, I didn't know until toward the end of writing it, why he got so much page time. And I just like to write about him. It's this funny little character who thinks he's a G-man when he's 12 years old, but he gets a lot of time. And it was only when I was finishing writing about the whole larger story that I realized that his absence on a particular night affected everything about the central story. So it became clear to me, but I just kept writing about him for a while. So I guess that's my answer, is that it has an odd structure, an unconventional structure, and language, it seemed to me, became paramount to keep readers invested as they moved through a setup that wasn't very reassuring or familiar to them.
And we'll, return to some of these ideas once we've gotten sort of a sense of your respective scopes. Larry, in Sundown Yellow Moon, you start with an assassination of a political figure and piece it together through a kind of investigative journalism from an unreliable narrator who conflates real and imagined events. I'm very interested in how this novel holds these ideas together. What do you think the reader has the power to do with this? And these are my 20 questions. Tell me the process of writing this novel, and I'll return to some of the questions about specific characters later on.
Well, one of the things that I think the reader has the power to do, it's funny, I can't remember, we were just, I was talking to somebody recently about video games and computer games and how interactive they are. And I thought, odd that, why didn't, as fiction writers, why didn't we grab a hold of that term first? Because, of course, fiction is and poetry, those are the ultimate in interactive arts. We're always trying to get readers engaged to help us tell our stories. And I was certainly aware as I was writing this novel that I was inviting readers in to judge the truth of some of these different stories that the narrator was telling in order to understand an event that occurred, this political assassination. But also knowing that they would be making judgments about his story on the basis of what they knew about him and his life, and that then they would perhaps make something up themselves, but they would have to know that they would be doing that on the basis of who they were. Mm-hmm. You know, in some ways, I think as fiction writers, what we want to have happen is for readers to read our books forever. They get to the last page, and then something happens, and they have to go back to the first page and read it over again. Certainly when you read Red Rover, when you get to the last page, you want to go back and read it again. And pretty soon, 5, 6, 7, 15 years have passed, and you keep reading the same novel, and it gets richer and richer and richer, and you're more involved in it. And it's not good for sales, maybe, but you know, we do want some effect like that for readers to participate in putting our stories together.
Thank you. Aryn, in The God of Animals, we start with a drowning, I saw as an Ophelia-esque quality. And so I wondered how, in some sense, a kind of innocence, going back to the murder and death event, the innocence is murdered. And we start with the beginning of Alice as a preteen, and through her school year and her journey through her adolescence, working with her father on a struggling horse ranch. No doubt the murder in this book is internalized in some sense. I'm interested in how Alice's growth or inner life is reflected in Polly Kane's death, or Sheila Altman's, her father's client, a sheltered girl who is being trained by Alice's father. So tell me a little bit more about this. And again, I think I'm returning to what I see in all 4 of these books, and this negotiation of the event and how it impacts the inner and outer lives of the characters.
When I was writing the book, it started as a short story that I wrote years before I went back to expand it into a novel. And really, when I went back to expand it, the only thing I had to work with was that, you know, this girl had drowned in the short story, and she wasn't, you know, anyone that was close to the main character. They weren't friends, but it was one of the things that made me think about the characters again, was the sort of absence of this person that the character really didn't know. And I think that, you know, my character is very different from myself, but in looking at the adolescent, you know, sort of experience, the coming of age, I think that my main character looks at all of these people around her as sort of, you know, windows into other worlds, into other lives. Specifically, this girl who's dead. She kind of sees it as an opportunity to, you know, step in to this vacant place and recreate her life, you know, under a different set of rules, which, you know, seems kind of familiar to the adolescent, you know, angst, the looking around at people and trying to define your life, you know, according to these other lives. And I think that, you know, one of the things I was the most interested in when I was working on this book was the sense of family and how, growing up, your family is the only life that you know until it begins to bump into the world in bigger ways. And, the character, I think, really grows into herself by trying on other people and then making choices that she actually has to live with that affect her life and the lives of those around her. Thank you.
So I thought now we could kind of go deeply into some of the things that we touched upon, and I would just like to just open it up to the four of you and see who would like to start. What are some of the goals? I mean, this is a big question you had. I know, Dee, you were talking about kind of sort of putting it together almost intuitively until the language took its shape and the characters came to life. But I think that's something you all did, is sort of figure out how this work was going to come into shape. I'm interested in how it might be a departure from other projects, or it grew out of some projects. So I know that's general, but I think you would have a lot to say about that sort of specifically, and continue some of the things you introduced. I know, Neil, you're working on a continuation, so there's probably so much that you have wanted to address in both this book and the next one.
Well, let me just interject quickly that the major goal, of course, is a six-figure advance. which I have yet to achieve.
I was interested in what Larry was saying about wanting to have the reader feel that they're writing the book, in a sense, on their own. And that's, when I read somebody like Alice Munro's Open Secrets, for example, that collection I think of in particular, there's a lot of real leaping around and in time, and gaps in between the chunks that really invite that kind of imaginative working at it yourself as a reader. And it may be that when that happens, we are working off of people who have given us the thrill of having invited us to do it ourselves. And so then you want to figure out how to keep your own work elastic enough and a little thrilling and a little unexplained, a little off-kilter, perhaps, in order to invite the reader to write it with you. And Larry articulated it better than I had been able to think about it previously, but it certainly is something that I think I was after on this.
Which is interesting, with both of your books, you do move through time in your, as a reader, we kind of anticipate the secret, piecing it together. And in some sense, I won't give anything away, we get certain ideas about how you're using time as a natural way to absorb some of the mysteries. And I didn't get to hear you on that panel where you talked about investigative journalism and the reporter, but I am interested in how you kind of collapse the needs of the reporter by allowing so much time to come in to the novel. That works against, I guess, the deadline. So I'm thinking also of that in relation to you, Larry, too, but that's neither here nor there, but a way for you to think about time.
Yeah. I'm always more comfortable talking about other people's work. So in Dee's novel, for example, one of the ways that we participate in putting together her story is it's sort of like what happens when we look at an impressionist painting, that the painter suggests certain things with brush strokes, but as Dee said, you have to make those brush strokes interesting in and of themselves, so they'll want to do more of that work. You know, sometimes I'm working on a novel and I think, I wish I didn't have to tell this page by page, day by day, year by year. Isn't there some way we can just zap this novel into a reader's mind and have it there all at once? Again, bad for sales, I know. But in the future, I think that's the way we'll be doing our novels. We'll just zap them into the reader's mind. Sometimes structure is just always a problem, sometimes because it's something that we have to deal with and we wish we didn't have to. And so the solutions we come up with are sometimes compromises.
Aryn, did you want to speak to structure or?
Structure.
Again, you can loosen up and tell me what you want to say.
Can we take back anything we said?
Yeah, you can.
No, I don't. I mean, it's hard for me to talk a lot about this is my first one, so I don't feel like I'm breaking out of any mold to just this one little book. But no, I think, I don't know, sort of in talking about mysteries, you know, the mysteries in some of these books, I think that a lot of times readers are really, motivated not so much in the mystery itself, but sort of in the effect that the mystery takes on the lives of the people who are working to solve it. And we're all talking about Dee's book. It was one of the things I really loved about Dee's book was, you kind of start off with the drive to understand what's happened, and by the end, the lives of the characters who have been so affected by this event are, to me, were so much more important than the mystery of, the initial mystery.
Can I just jump in here for just a second? With regard to the business that Larry and Dee have articulated so well about interaction with the reader, both Hemingway and Solzhenitsyn said very similar things, and I'm sure many others have too. But Hemingway's quote is, "The object of fiction is to render it such that it becomes a part of the reader's experience." That is to say, so that they're not reading about it, so that it actually happens to them. And that's where, to use kind of hyped up terms maybe, the real magic and mystery of prose comes in, and that's what separates, to my mind, mediocre writing from good writing from great writing. It has everything to do with just how the writer is able to put those words on the page in such a way that the reader becomes absolutely absorbed. And you think about it, it's just black squiggles on a white page. Very mysterious stuff, and there's a great deal more to it, than. Yeah.
Any comments that you'd like to make about each other's work? Since I think that we're having fun speaking about each other's work.
Well, I think and I'd like to ask Neil about this, where there are the kind of conventions of a thriller or a mystery in place. All of us have elements of that in our books, and it seems to me that one of the difficulties can be figuring out how much information to dole out and when, so that the reader doesn't feel yanked around, manipulated, and yet, of course, you are being yanked around and manipulated. That's what a concoction is, what art is, really. And so I guess that's a question that I haven't, you sort of come to the answer for yourself, but I'm curious about how you do it, Neil, because your book feels so human, and yet you have to withhold certain key, there have to be red herrings, there have to be withheld information, and how you do that without arming the reader against you because you haven't let them know what they want to know.
Well put. The short answer is that there is no answer. I mean, to me at least, I don't claim to be very good at it. It's an extremely delicate balance of exactly as you say, how much information do you give them to keep them interested, and in terms of the crime or kind of startling stuff, powerful pull stuff. How much do you withhold? You don't want them to feel cheated. You don't want them to get bored, but you don't want to show all your cards right away. And that comes down to the whole business of rhythm and pacing, and which is different for everybody and different for every book, and you never get it right.
Larry, Aryn, do you want to speak to the pacing?
Larry.
I feel like a therapist.
I get nervous when I have a passage of exposition that's longer than a page, and
Amen.
I guess I figure, well, this has gone on long enough. Let's bring out a gun or something. Maybe we think about it in slightly more sophisticated. No, we don't. We don't. Those are things that you feel, and you feel it as you're writing it, because of course the reader isn't there yet, and so I guess I do think a little bit about modes. So a page of exposition, that's a lot for me, and so then I think got to be dialogue, got to be action. A paragraph of description, that's a lot. Time for some dialogue, time for some action. But then a lot of dialogue, a lot of action, time for some thought. And most of the time these are not conscious decisions, but sometimes they are. Sometimes I am aware of thinking about it in these terms.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'll talk about it now. No, it's funny, wasn't it like Nabokov that said that he would pick up a book and if there was too much dialogue, he would just close it. It's funny, like I tend to write everything in scene and then have to go back and think, oh God, does this scene where we find out these two pieces of information really need to take up 20 pages of time? Probably not. I think it's strange with pacing though, like a lot of times, you'll have a sense that something needs to happen at a certain point, but writing up to it, I'll often have no idea what that thing is that's going to happen at that certain point, but at that point, something better have happened. And I start to get a little panicky as I get closer and closer to it, thinking, oh God, something's got to happen. But something usually does, and it's, usually kind of a surprise, and I think that's the nice thing about, too much planning. I try to do it sometimes, and then, it ends up all falling apart anyway, so I like to be surprised by what happens.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. It's great to just negotiate this structure that is both surprising you and surprising the reader too. So it's nice to hear that it's so organic on both sides. What I thought I'd do is open this up for questions, and you could just sort of stand up and ask your question. Yes.
When you're talking about engaging the reader, do you think there's a distinction between the role of art and the role of craft?
And yeah, I guess it's open for all of you to.
Yeah, I'm sure. I don't think he was looking at me. I do not make that distinction. For that matter, I don't think in terms of art or craft when I'm writing. I think about words and sentences.
Somebody said once, and I can never quote things well, but it was, and now I can't even remember who said it, but that happiness is not a goal to be sought. It's a byproduct of the way that you offer yourself to life, basically. I'm sure it was said better than that. But I think of art and craft as sort of the same. I make the same sort of distinction, that if you go and sit down and go, this is going to be art, and neglect or don't really primarily address yourself to the craft, the art isn't going to break through, probably. And it might be a futile exercise to try to decide that you are going to make art on a given day. I think that it's probably better to try to write as well as you can on a given day and hope that the process and the repetition and the sheer sweat of it will open up a window in which something kind of interesting and strange and maybe even otherworldly can happen.
I'll address this to Deirdre McNamer first, just because I can speak to your work. But in My Russian Beloved from Chernobyl, and other books you have in the Missing Silos, and I'm curious for all of you, how intentional is social with local content when you're maybe a later stage of writing, or how aware are you of it in your life?
Well, I like to, I think we're all living in a world that is getting in some ways smaller and smaller as the populations get bigger and bigger. And so it seems to me almost fraudulent to write just about, for me anyway, to write in a way that doesn't acknowledge that we're all wrapped up in a lot bigger worlds than the ones that we think that we're waking up to every day. And here in Missoula, I know people who are here because of Chernobyl. And I've worked with them and beside them, and so it seems that is a way to talk about characters as well as offering some kind of look or perspective at a bigger political situation. I don't think I set out to make any kind of statement about what was happening in Belarus with their safety standards, but the world comes in, and I like it when in what I read, I like it when there's a nod to a larger, more complicated world.
Yes?
It seems to me that I've heard a lot, every time I hear a writer on NPR, for example, talking about their writing, they talk about cutting it down, cutting it back, making it, cutting out the description. This goes, I guess, back to your question about pacing. I'm wondering if you all are getting that kind of pressure from your editors, and if the day when a Faulkner can come out is gone.
It's a good question.
It's a good question.
You know, when I sent my first story in for publication, the editor got back to me really quickly and was like, you know, we really like the story, but it needs to be 4 pages shorter to run in the magazine, and which was like a 20-page story. That was a lot to have to cut, but I really wanted the story to be published, so I did it. And it was such a better story after I did. It was, you know, it was just so much better. So much of it could have gone, but I didn't know that until someone made me do it. And now it's the last thing I do before I hand anything over, as I go through and try to make it shorter, just because it seems like it makes it better. But I mean, I don't think that's, you know, I mean, that's just because there's a lot of crap in there that you think is important until you really look at it, and then you think, well, maybe not.
I'm not opposed to cutting per se, and I do plenty of it myself, but since you asked it in terms of editors, I do worry about people who suggest cuts after they have had the benefit of that material. And now they figure that other people don't need that. Well, it's already there for them. They've already read the manuscript with that, and so their sense of it is with that material there. You know, it concerns me.
Anyone else want to talk about that editing process, just because it is so interesting to figure out what is part of your, the intention of your vision of the language as art and what the editor comes in and carves.
Well, my sense is, you know, I had a big gap in time between books, and so I could kind of measure what I felt was maybe going on in the publishing world between 99 and 2007. And it seems to me that editors, well, everybody in the business seems to me to be working with so much information and so fast and doing so many emails every day, and that the actual time for mulling and thoughtfulness and perhaps thinking for a day about a difficult passage, say, in a manuscript that you got, is just gone. I feel that it is. I hope I'm wrong. And I do know some people out there who I mean, there are plenty of people in the business who are ardent book readers and lovers and wouldn't be doing it if they didn't love books, including difficult books. But it seems to me that there are constraints at work now just on their daily lives that make a sort of quick, safe, consoling book perhaps an easier sale. I hope that isn't the case. I mean, I hope that a Faulkner or a complete weirdo can just get out there and publish something like somebody has never seen or heard before, because if that doesn't happen anymore, then the business and the life of letters is going to stagnate. And so I think that might go to your question, you know, is there room for the odd, weird thing? And I certainly hope so, but I think that it's, I think there are a lot of people working at the limits of their energy in that business now, and fielding so many more inquiries and having to use their time in ways other than thinking about the book, that I worry as well.
I interject Dan Conaway, who's in the audience here, my first editor at HarperCollins, as well as my current editor and many other people I know in the business. They do all their reading and editing at night and on the weekends. Mm-hmm. You know, they work, put in 10, 12-hour days in the office, and then they go home and edit.
Do we have one more question? Oh, yes. Do I see one? I don't have my glasses on. So, okay. Well, we can continue just for a few more minutes. I wondered a little bit more about your characters, and think it's hard to get deeply into them in these last few minutes. But how do you think they've emerged for you? I know Dee, it's funny to think of some of your characters kind of taking hold of you and taking up more space. I think of Whitcomb and Opal, and they sort of get more decisive and more just quite present in that. And I just wondered if that was an instance where your characters were taking you over.
Well, I think that, you know, it's a long bit of work to write a book or a novel, you know, no matter how short it is. It seems long, and it is long. And so I think that one way through it is to become invested in your characters, sort of for their own sakes, just feel in the mood to or have the inclination to discover new things about them. There always will be characters, I think, in any novel that are almost purely functional characters. But there are, I mean, they have a job to do in terms of the story, but some don't, and they might seem to be on the periphery, and I think by investing yourself in them or allowing yourself to stay interested in them without knowing, perhaps for a while, what their ultimate function is in terms of the plot, you can entertain yourself that way. And sometimes it will help you know what an interesting plot might be, or what you're actually trying to talk about, maybe in terms of what the book is about, as grand as that sounds. So yeah, I think that it's hard to get around the idea when you've had a couple of, say, bad writing weeks, and you look back and you go, I've spent all this time on this character that I don't even know quite how they fit in yet. Is that just down the tubes? You know, you can really start questioning yourself and wish yourself to be a much more efficient and directed character creator and know exactly why they're doing what they're doing, but it doesn't usually work that way.
I know with Larry, with your character Jean, we even have the narrator focused on this character along with the reader, which I think creates this great intrigue where Jean is sort of always being explored or reimagined. And I wondered how Jean sort of developed for you.
It's interesting that you pose it in that way, because in some ways he does develop through the narrator's interest in being able to do something that we cannot do, which is to penetrate the consciousness of another human being, unless we're writers, and then we can imagine our way into those people's lives. So there is a way in which my characters are sometimes realer to me than people in real life, because I do have access to their thoughts, something that I don't have in life. There's a question, by the way.
Oh, great.
We've been talking a lot about discrete aspects. We've been talking about character on one place, and structure on another place, and language on another. I guess I wanted to pose to you guys on the panel, do you think of these consciously as discrete elements, or is it, I'm assuming, or I have some sense anyway, that it's often much more kind of organic process than that, and I'm just curious to know how discreetly you think of these elements, or if it comes about in a different way.
Well, I would say that it has to do, from my experience anyway, had to do a lot with just the time of learning, going through the process. I've been doing this for 25, 30 years with, no success at all for most of it. And in the course of all that early time, first I just kind of started writing because I like doing it. Then I started paying a lot of attention to craft and structure and language as discrete elements. And by now, I think they've pretty well melded into a more automatic, organic deal where I'm not conscious of that as I put it on the page.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it might even be helpful to think of it as a kind of quasi-athletic pursuit, in that, you try to learn how to be a high jumper, and you have to learn this and this and this, and you have to take into account, what shape you're in, and you get coached and all of that. But finally, when you're doing it and you're going to meets and you're high jumping, if you're any good, or even if you're not, probably if you've just done it long enough, all of those things are going to be melded, and then you kind of go from feel, and if it just isn't working, and you might want to parse it out later and go, well, it's not working because this character finally doesn't work, but in the doing of it, it really does, I think, effectively happen altogether.
I have a question about writing. having moved here from New York and thinking about the publishing world and thinking about the editing and thinking about the lack of time and the time constraints that a lot of editors have there, I wondered if you could, a few of you could answer to actually just the experience of writing in Missoula or having spent time here and writing here and in other environments or maybe urban environments versus this special community. And that's something just for me that maybe many people could answer, but I see it as a magical place where a lot happens, and I wondered if there was a way to speak to that.
Well, I wrote in the Holiday Inn this morning. So.
It's pretty nice, huh?
It was.
It's a really Missoula holiday. Yeah.
Forget it.
I didn't feel the magic, but I got my work done.
It's first of all, it's a great place, as everybody knows. It's wonderful, it's beautiful, and second, it's terrific to have a writers' community. Writing's very lonely work, and you're not in an office, you're not socializing with other people. So when you have other people who are in the same kind of bitter, desperate struggle that you are, and you can get together with them fairly frequently and kind of hash it all out and bitch and all that sort of stuff, that really helps.
Yeah, when I was sort of skulking around in my bathrobe this morning thinking I should be writing, it would have helped me to know that you were writing in the Holiday Inn, Larry. And, that's sort of part of it, is that on a given day, there's a bunch of people out there trying to do the same sort of strange thing. And we're not on the phone talking to each other about it a lot, or, at least that's my experience, is to me, it's just a sort of environment of work and writing viewed as worthy work and work that is worthy of your highest efforts, that you are not going to get contradicted in that view here. And I think that that's sort of a negative way to talk about it, but it's the way that I think about it.
It's nice to be, I think, separate, too, from like New York. I mean, I always thought I was going to be a writer and move to New York, and it didn't work out that way. But I'm really glad at times now. I have a lot of friends who are, living in New York as writers, and they're so much more, consumed by sort of the business aspects of it. They really know, every deal that's going down, and I really like being far away from that. Everybody's there at the end of the phone or on the email, but it's nice to kind of have your writing be separate from sort of the epicenter of the business part of it.
Thank you so much, and thank you for coming. Again, all their books are at the Holiday Inn, and we will have some more readings today.
Thank you, Brigida.
Thanks, Brigida.
Those are good questions.